Good morning or good afternoon, class, depending on what period you have me. Mr. Long here. Today we are going to get into our third video lecture, and today we are going to be discussing the Enlightenment. Now, for the last couple days, hopefully, we have an idea of the basics about the Enlightenment and what the Enlightenment was all about, and what happened before the Enlightenment, and the influence that the Enlightenment will have on people and countries after. So to backtrack a little bit, and hopefully we remember this from the video that we watched a couple days ago in class, but right before the Enlightenment happens, we have another time period, and that time period was known as the Scientific Revolution. And for about 1,000 years, from about 500 to about 1500, those years were known as the Middle Ages, and not a whole lot happened during the Middle Ages. And then right after the Middle Ages, right around 1500, the Scientific Revolution occurs, and that is going to change everything. And because of the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment will emerge, and it will influence many, many people and many countries after. So just to quickly talk about the Scientific Revolution. Before, during the Middle Ages, guys, I hope you understand this, and you guys actually need to understand this, but the church was very, very powerful. And whatever the church said had to be the truth, according to the church and the people who lived during the Middle Ages. If the church said something, they're not going to lie to you. For example, according to the church and to the Bible, God created the universe. And God created all the planets, including the sun. And because we all live on Earth, God created Earth as the center. And all other planets, including the sun, revolved around Earth, because Earth was the most important planet, because that is where we live. This was a common teaching that was taught for hundreds and hundreds of years by the church to the people. Well, now, during the Scientific Revolution, you are going to have people who can actually prove through science, through math, that the Earth was not the center of the universe. Actually, the sun is. And all planets revolve around the sun. Now, the reason I'm giving this example is because it's very important for everyone to understand how important the church was and their teachings. But the church not always said the truth. And people began to find out that the church was lying to them, using the example of now the sun being the center of the universe. So when people could physically see, by using instruments like telescopes and stuff like that, that the sun is the center of the universe, people start to doubt the church, and people start to leave the church, and people begin to think on their own. They no longer rely on the church to tell them what the truth is. They are going to rely on science, they're going to rely on math, and they're going to rely on their own brains to come up with conclusions, to come up with the truth. And that is what the Enlightenment is all about. It's a new way of thinking. So the Enlightenment is going to take place in the mid-1600s, and it's going to go all the way through the late 1700s. And the Enlightenment is a time period or a movement that stressed reason and thought, and the power of the individual to solve their own problems. The Enlightenment was also known as the Age of Reason. So please, right next to Enlightenment, write down the Age of Reason. Now, Enlightenment is going to stress the individual. It's going to stress people thinking on their own rather than being told what the truth is. So early on during the Enlightenment, you're going to have two very, very important people, two Englishmen. One being Thomas Hobbes, and the other being John Locke. And these are two guys that really started the Enlightenment when it came to political thinking. Now, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were complete opposites in what they believed in. Thomas Hobbes felt that all humans were naturally selfish and wicked. Now, selfish guys, you need to understand, if you're a selfish person, that means you really only care about yourself. You don't care about anyone else. And if you are wicked, I guess we can say another word for wicked is like evil. So according to Thomas Hobbes, he believed that every single person was born selfish and wicked. And the only way for people to be controlled, according to Thomas Hobbes, was to hand over all of their rights to their rulers. And in exchange for handing over all their rights to their king or queen, they would gain law and order. And if they gained law and order, those people would guarantee that they would be protected. Now, Thomas Hobbes felt that rulers needed total power over their citizens to keep them under control. Now, if a king or queen has total power over their subjects, that would be an absolute monarchy. If a king or queen had to follow a set of rules and laws, that would be a constitutional monarchy. So Thomas Hobbes definitely believed that people needed to be ruled by an absolute monarch. That would keep them in order, and that would also keep them protected. Now, John Locke, on the other hand, was complete opposite. John Locke felt that people were able to learn from experience and improve for themselves. Basically, learn from their mistakes. You make a mistake, you learn from it, you don't make that same mistake again. Now, John Locke felt that people were born with the natural ability to govern their own affairs and to look after the welfare of society. Basically, people having the responsibility to govern the country, and it is given to the people. Okay? Now, John Locke criticized absolute monarchy. He hated the idea of being completely controlled by one person. He felt that people had rights and freedoms, and they should be given those rights and freedoms. And he favored the idea of self-government. Now, self-government is a true democracy. Now, according to John Locke, all people were born free and equal with three natural rights. Now, I think I've mentioned this before, you guys, but natural rights are rights that people are born with. No one can ever take those natural rights away from people because they are born with them, and every single human being has them. Now, according to John Locke, these three natural rights include life, liberty, and property. And John Locke says that the purpose of government is for the government to protect these natural rights. And if the government fails to protect our natural rights, we as citizens, as people, since we give the government power, have the right to overthrow the government. And once we overthrow the government, we can set up a government that will protect our natural rights, and a government that will do its job the proper way. Now, according to John Locke, the power of the government comes from the consent of the people. If you consent to something, that means you agree to it, you approve of it, you give permission. Okay? Now, those are two complete opposite ideas. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke. Thomas Hobbes believing that absolute monarchy was the only way for people to be controlled. And then John Locke feeling that people need a true democracy and that we give the power to the government, and it's the government's job to protect our three natural rights. Now, the Enlightenment is really going to reach its height in the mid-1700s. And it's really going to take off in the country of France. And then from France, it's going to spread to other countries. But it's going to reach its height in the mid-1700s in France. Now, people could apply all aspects of life according to the philosophers. And to stop right there, guys, philosophers are like philosophers. And a philosopher is a really smart person. A philosopher is an Enlightenment thinker. And the question is, what could people apply to all aspects of a life according to the philosophers? They could apply reason. Reason, reason, reason. Now, there are 5 concepts or ideas that the philosophers believed in. The first one being reason, the second one being nature, the third one being happiness, the fourth one being progress, and the fifth and final one being liberty. And remember what liberty means. Liberty is another word for freedom. Now we're going to talk about several different Enlightenment thinkers. We've already mentioned Hobbes. We've mentioned Locke. Now we are going to mention Voltaire. And Voltaire said a very, very famous quote. And his quote was, "I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." Now I want you to think of what this quote really means. Once again, I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. Now guys, hopefully we all know that this is a perfect example of freedom of speech. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Now, does that mean you have to agree to the person that's sitting next to you or in front of you? No, you don't. But everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And you have to respect their own opinion because everyone has the freedom of speech. Now, moving on from Voltaire, we have another individual, another Enlightenment thinker or philosopher, and his name was Montesquieu. And Montesquieu believed in the division of powers among the different branches of government. Now, he believed that there should be 3 branches of government. And these branches of government would include the executive branch or power, the legislative branch or power, and finally the judicial branch or power. Now, each one of these branches of government would have their own jobs and duties. And one branch is not more powerful than the other. All 3 branches of government are all equal to each other, but they have different jobs or duties. So what is the job of the executive power? They are to enforce or carry out the laws. Once again, the executive powers are to enforce or carry out the laws. The legislative powers, they are to make the laws. And the judicial powers, they are to interpret the laws. In other words, they are to explain what the laws mean for everyone, so everyone understands the laws and they can follow the laws. Now, Montesquieu believed that there should be separation of powers for one reason. He believed that one group should not be more powerful than the other. And the other job of each branch of government is to keep check of each other and to make sure that one does not get more power than the other. And that would be called checks and balances. Because if the executive branch, which would be like the President of the United States, if he got too much power and more power than the other 2 branches, it is no longer a democracy, but rather more like a monarchy or a dictatorship. So Montesquieu came up with the idea of separation of powers, checks and balances, executive branch, judicial branch, and legislative branch. Now, Montesquieu, of course, wrote a book on the separation of powers and the checks and balances, and it's going to help us here in the United States when we write the U.S. Constitution. And the U.S. Constitution is our government, and it's a long list of rules and laws that people have been following for hundreds of years. So moving away from Montesquieu now and moving on to our next Enlightenment thinker or philosopher, um, this man's name is Rousseau, Rousseau. And Rousseau had a very famous quote, just like Voltaire, and his quote was, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Okay? According to Rousseau, the only good type of government is a government that is formed by the people. Okay? He wrote a book, and his book was titled Social Contract. And he felt that we had a contract with our government. We gave the government the power to do its job. And its job obviously was to protect the people. And us in turn would have to follow the rules and laws that the government came up with. Now, one of the questions is, what did people have to give up in favor of the common good of society? So in order for society to run correctly and to function, we as people would have to give up some of our rights and some of our freedoms. Okay? Now, Rousseau felt that all people were equal and that titles of nobility should be abolished. Now, remember, guys, if you abolish something, that means you get rid of it. So he felt that everyone should be equal to each other, regardless of how rich or how poor you are. Okay? Now, Rousseau's ideas are going to inspire many, many people. And they are going to inspire many leaders of the French Revolution to overthrow the monarchy in 1789. Now, we're not going to talk about the French Revolution yet. We're going to spend a long time on the French Revolution and the American Revolution. But the main idea, guys, is that these Enlightenment ideas, these new ideas that are occurring and spreading all throughout Europe, are going to force countries to change. And they are going to force governments to give people more rights and freedoms. And this is going to be a transition from a monarchy to more of a democracy. Now we have another individual, and his name is Bessara. And Bessara believed that a person accused of a crime should receive a speedy trial and that torture should never be used. Now this person believed that even criminals were going to be given basic rights. If you committed a crime, you did not go straight to jail where they would lock the door and throw away the key and you were to stay in prison for the rest of your life. It doesn't work that way. Okay? It's kind of like our legal system now. This is where we get the idea from. Okay? If you commit a crime here in the United States and you are caught, you will be put in front of a jury, you will be put on trial, and then from there you will be guilty or innocent. And if you are guilty, then you will be sentenced. And sometimes sentencing is minor as a fine or as severe as jail time. But even though you commit a crime and you are considered to be a criminal, you are still given basic rights, and that is the main idea. Now, according to Bessara, he believed that capital punishment should be abolished. Now, capital punishment is another name for like the death penalty or execution. He believed that people should not be put to death because of crimes that they committed. Now, according to Bessara, government should not or should seek the good, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So one more time. Government should seek the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Now, finally, we need to mention Mary Wollstonecraft, and this is our first female Enlightenment thinker or philosopher. And she felt that women should receive an education that is equal to that of a man. So regardless if you are male or female, guy or girl, you should still get an equal education to each other. And it should not matter if you are a female. You should be able to get an education. You should be able to go to college if you want to. Back in the day, guys, okay, the women's place in society was to, when they reached a certain age, to get married, to have children, and to stay home and take care of the home. Mary Wollstonecraft believes that women should have the right to an education if they want to. So they should have options rather than just staying at home. So now we have Enlightenment thinkers that are trying to get equal rights for not only men, but for women also. She felt that women should enter the fields of medicine and politics. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. Women can do just as good of a job as a man can, according to Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, we will mention these people later on, and we'll go into more detail. But there's a couple of other things that we need to mention. A key term is the term salon. Now, a salon back during the Enlightenment were places where people got together and they talked about these new Enlightenment ideas. They were social gatherings to spread Enlightenment ideas. And it's really important that you guys understand that. A salon is a place where people got together and they talked about these new ideas. Because if people didn't get together and they didn't talk about these ideas, the idea would never spread. Okay, so that's really important. Now, I already mentioned this before, but the scientific revolution gave people the confidence that human reason could solve social problems. During the Enlightenment, people began to question openly their religion and the teachings of the church. Now, in the very beginning of this video lecture, guys, I mentioned the whole idea of God creating the universe and that the earth was the most important planet and the earth was the center of the universe. And because it was the center, all other planets, including the sun, revolved around the earth. But because of the scientific revolution, because of advancements in technology with different instruments like the telescope, you're going to have scientists that could physically prove that the earth is not the center of the universe, but rather the sun is the center of the universe. And the earth and all other planets revolve around the sun. So when you can actually see it with your own eyes, that must mean that it is true. So that makes the church look really bad. That makes the church look like they have been lying for the last 1,000 years. And people begin to question the church and they begin to leave the church. Scientists were now able to solve the mysteries through math and science. And of course, guys, people are going to not turn to the church anymore. They're going to turn to themselves. And they are going to come up with their own answers. If they have a question, they're going to figure out the answers on their own. And they're going to think on their own. Do not worry about question number 43. We will get to that when we get to our next unit. So with that, guys, please rewind if you need to. And that concludes our video lecture.